We're back out here at the Big Lake once again, and today we're talking about my favorite baits, tips, and tricks for the month of February that are sure to get you more bites. You don't want to miss this one. Stick around. Got him. Ooh, that's a good one. And here is this video's featured comment. Congratulations! If you would like to have a chance to have your comment featured in an upcoming video, all you've got to do is leave a comment. And now, on with the video. Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing. And here we are, the month of February already. Can you believe it? But that means, well, we need to talk about the tricks and tips and lures that I'm using for this month. And not just for my neck of the woods here in South Mississippi, but you can apply these all over the country from the bank or from the boat because of how I like to approach it. You know, I fish in that little plastic boat. That's what I do. And I'm only got room for 4 rods. That's all I have room for in that little boat. So I have to choose very judiciously what I can bring and what I'm not going to bring. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't bring plenty of lures with me. I've got plenty of room for that, but I don't have a lot of room for rods. So that still pares down what I can do as far as working different types of baits. Like, for example, I'm not going to be able to bring a great big jig rod, my flipping stick, a cranking rod, something that I'm going to use for general purpose like a Texas rig that's got braid on it, something that's got fluorocarbon on it, you know, different types of spinning outfits or whatever for. Now what I normally bring is, well, I bring 2 spinning rods and I bring 2 different types of bait casts, and that generally has me covered. You know, I can really sympathize with bank anglers in that aspect because a lot of times when you're hoofing it from the bank, you don't have room to carry a lot of gear. Now, you know, a boat, a nice bass boat, you basically have Bass Pro on the water, don't you? You literally have an entire warehouse at your disposal, which seems kind of ironic considering that all you have is that boat. And when you're hoofing it from the bank, well, you should be able to have access to a lot more because you're not restricted by the space. But that's how it is. But let's talk about how I'm utilizing that and how I'm working that so I can still find ways to put myself on fish as we move closer into the spawn. See, here in South Mississippi, we are about to hit the spawn. It's just literally a couple of weeks away. Now, the water temperatures come up just a little bit, but not nearly as much as it normally would. But that hasn't stopped the bass. I'm still catching bass that have bright red lipstick. I'm seeing ones that have bloody tails. So they're practicing, they're getting ready, or maybe even a couple of them have already started to move up on bed. This time of year, it's absolutely not unheard of, even with the cooler water temperatures. But when I go out to the lake, or should I say before I go out to the lake, you've heard me say that I'm going to look at the weather report. Now, that not only dictates or helps dictate where at on the lake that I'm going to fish, it helps me decide what type of fishing I'm going to do when I get out there. Now, let's say it's going to be a fairly calm day. And when I say calm, I'm talking winds generally around 5 to 7 miles an hour or even lower. Now, I don't like complete calm because you want a little bit of wind-blown current, especially, you know, on a man-made impoundment where there's very little natural current being generated, especially if they've got the spillway closed. You're going to have to rely on wind for that current. And any time of year that you go fishing, you want current. Current is your friend. You don't need a lot of it. You just need some to get those nutrients moving, to get those bait fish active. But as I said, whenever that wind is going to be in that 5 to 7 mile an hour range, when it's going to be light, you know, and pretty consistent. I usually like it to blow north or south, you know, in that direction. I prefer out of the south because that usually has a better effect on the fish. But from the north, I can work with that too because that allows me to set up and just drift down. and I don't have to be on the trolling motor all day. But I can work something like this, right? Waco rigs, wacky rigs, and in this case, a NACO rig. It's got the nail weight in it. This is something that I've been working a little bit deeper. That's why I've got the nail weight on it. And even though it looks like a wacky rig, you actually fish these just a little bit differently than you do a wacky rig, where these are going to maintain a lot more bottom contact, and you're essentially going to be twitching them across nice and slow. 10-pound braid on my spinning combo. I've got a 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. Sometimes I'll go with a 6-pound fluorocarbon leader, or even a monofilament leader. Although usually not, with this medium type of rod here that's got a little bit more flex in it, I'm not generally going to go with a monofilament leader. But if I feel like the fish just need a little bit more time to inhale that bait, I need a little bit more stretch before I'm setting the hook, especially in colder water like this, I may actually go with a monofilament. But as I said, on days when the wind's going to be a little bit more calm, those are the types of presentations that I'm going to be fishing, along with something like this. I've got a brown football jig. It's got one of my craws on the back that I make. And I love fishing this type of jig year round, but especially now. Right now, a football head jig or a flipping jig or a casting jig, any type of jig, something with craw type of appendages will work just fine. I'm not going with something that's got a huge amount of flap, like a rage craw or something like that. I prefer something that's a little bit more subtle, which mine are. They've got just a little bit of flap. I'm not necessarily fishing a flat chunk type trailer yet. I could if I wanted to, but something like this with just a light amount of flap is what I'm looking for. Oh yeah, and I'm fishing this, obviously, this is a bait cast. I've got 30-pound braid because today I was fishing in some slop with this. I was dragging this through right on the edge of some hydrilla, and because I was fishing near some hydrilla, normally it's not a place that I would be fishing something like a football jig. Usually I would be fishing something like a flipping jig or a casting jig there, but I wanted this particular brown presentation. This is one of the times that I actually was worried about color. You guys know me, I'm not big on the color bandwagon most of the time, but brown, especially right now, a brown jig will get you bites. And unfortunately, this was the only solid brown jig that I had today. I had some that had a few strands of brown fibers in it or whatnot, but they just weren't exactly what I was looking for. I wanted a good solid brown color, and the reason why I'm matching that so closely, that color brown, well, because it works so well. As a matter of fact, I don't necessarily need to have brown craw to be effective with a brown jig. This is one of my favorite color jigs to throw. You've heard me talk about, as far as soft plastics go, I love Junebug. Junebug is my favorite soft plastic color to throw in the big lake. Well, brown's probably one of my favorite jig colors to throw because of how well it does. Here in South Mississippi, even in places like Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, and Florida, I've had great success with a brown jig. And guys like Gerald Swindell have actually said, tie on a brown jig, you'll catch bass anywhere with it. So I've got to say that it's pretty portable. So I would recommend that to you. Try tying on a brown jig. But as I said, those are more for the slower types of days. Now, if days are a little bit more windy, we're starting to get up to that 10-mile-an-hour wind area. Well, in the springtime, you've got to think lipless crank, don't you? And there are so many different ways to fish these. And I just did a video about a couple of retrieves that I know nobody else in your fishery is doing that will certainly get you bites. I'm going to put a link to that video if you haven't watched it. Check it out. I'm telling you, it's very, very helpful. Now, I don't necessarily like lipless cranks that have a whole lot of noise, right? Like, I modify mine. This one's got a lot less rattle than, say, this Googan clutch. You hear this clutch, and then you hear the one that I mod. It's got a little bit of a rattle, but it's not a whole lot. Again, this is another one of those brown types of baits that I like to throw. It's kind of got that crawfish pattern on it, and it works well for this area out here. I may throw bright red craw, style lipless cranks from time to time, but for the most part, I'm sticking to something like this cotton cordell, this modded one, or something that's more muted like this. And in the summertime, what I'll be switching to obviously is something that's more of a cleaner chrome type or a shad pattern, because that's what those bass really like to key on from a distance here in South Mississippi. And you have to think about that. You have to think about how your baits serve their purpose, right? Something like a jig, something like a NACO rig, something like a wacky rig. Those are very visual presentations for the most part. Now with a wacky rig or a NACO rig or even with a jig, you can be incorporating scent into it. But for the most part, the bass is going to be locked in on with vision, especially at closer range. And that's when color can play a little bit more of a factor. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be natural. It just has to be interesting to those bass. Now, if we're starting to get into the windiness of it, right, we're getting in that 10 to 15 mile an hour wind, I'm switching to something like this spinnerbait. On a windy day when we've got a lot of current going, this can be your best friend. This is an excellent windy day. Now, a swim bait can also work great. A swim jig is another great alternative for grassy and vegetative areas on a windy day. This is one of my favorite windy day baits to throw. And I got to the point where I really like this little Googan Zingers, a little 3/8 ounce bait. So far, I've got no complaints with it. It's caught me some nice fish and I haven't really lost any. So, you know, that's basically the criteria, right? Is it catching fish? Are you losing fish whenever you get them hooked? I'm not having problem with either one of those. So this one right here, whatever your favorite brand of spinnerbait, I'm telling you, a white spinnerbait is going to be just fine, especially if you want to fish right in the middle of that water column, which is where I was fishing today. Targeting those suspended bass, maybe in just a little bit deeper water. As that wind is pushing me along, as that wind is carrying me along, I'll let this sink down in that water just a little bit and I will slow roll it. Unlike something like a crankbait or a bladed jig or a jerkbait or something else where I'm actually imparting action onto that, this I pretty much just slow crank. And I will slow crank it along timber and I'll slow crank it along weed lines. And that's where I'm going to get my bites. Again, on a windy day, this is going to be one of my go-tos. Now, if we want to scale that up and bring that to, you know, the biggest level we can, well, then we're going to do something like an Alabama rig. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, lowbrow, you've hit your head. That is a flutter spoon, not an Alabama rig. Well, earlier today when I got out to the lake, it was this guy right here, a umbrella rig that I had tied on with some Scottsboro swim baits on it. And that's what I started fishing with. Unfortunately, I broke it off. And that's the thing about losing an Alabama rig or an umbrella rig whenever you break one off, is you're not just losing the rig. I lost 3 1/8 swim bait jig heads, as well as 2 3/8 ounce swim bait jig heads, as well as the entire pack of Scottsboro swim baits, you know, so all of that is gone. So however much money that is. But anyway, I decided I was going to put a flutter spoon on it and just work with it. I didn't get any bites on it, but that doesn't mean that a flutter spoon can't be an effective presentation. It's another windy day type of presentation that I like to use. The problem with today was, though, is that my little boat was getting pushed along a little bit too quickly and I wasn't able to fish this properly. That matters. Being able to fish it properly matters. So make sure that whatever presentations you're using, that you've got your cadence properly adjusted. Now, what was I fishing that Alabama rig on? Well, this is my flipping stick. That's what I used today. 50-pound braid. Now, I didn't have to have braid on here, but because I was using my flipping stick, that's what was on here. So what I did was an extra long 20-pound fluorocarbon leader to compensate for that braid. So essentially, I had a 15 to 20 foot long 20-pound, might have been 22-pound fluorocarbon leader I had on here. And the reason why I was using my flipping stick is because it's a 7.6 heavy. And when I'm using an A-rig, I want a broomstick. I need a broomstick because that thing's going to weigh 2.5 ounces or in that area once you get it all loaded up. And I needed a rod that was going to be able to handle that. And that's why I used my flipping stick. And my flipping stick is like anything else that's in my arsenal. It's very versatile, and I like to have things that are very versatile. All right, we've got the old A-rig, the old umbrella rig, and I've got some Scottsboro swing baits tied on. And I just want to give it a old fishy poo. And the thing about Mississippi is I can actually have 5 hooks. Mississippi is a good place for that because you can actually have 5 hooks. So you can actually have all the hooks you want on your A-rig. There's no limitation on the number of exposed hooks. I don't need any dummy rigs. So if I was fishing in another state that had different requirements, different regulations, you have to pay attention. That's one of the things with an A-rig. You can't just take it out and go fishing with it. You've got to look up the regulations in your waterway. Ignorance is not an excuse. They will give you a ticket anyway, and they may take your rods away and your boats away too if you know. And that's kind of, I want you to tighten up just a little bit. There we go. Got him. Ooh, that's a good one. On the A-rig. Yeah, that's a deeper fish right there. Ooh, he choked it too. Look at that. Alright, so they are kind of out deep. He hit it pretty good. North of a pound. Look at how silver. Look at how silver. He's got some hints of green in there. But that means that cold water pushed those fish out deeper than they normally are this time of year. That is a gorgeous, beautiful fish. But as I said, those are some of the things that I'm looking for as we move through the month of February. I'm taking note of the different types of days, and I'm adjusting my fishing, my presentations accordingly. On lighter days, I can go a little bit slower. That doesn't mean that I can't burn a crankbait. That doesn't mean that I can't use a square bill or a lipless. But I'm finding that I'm getting better bites when I'm doing something that's more visual. And it allows me to plan for everything if I have to. I can have a wacky rig all the way up to an Alabama rig or a flutter spoon, and I will have all my bases covered. Like I said, first things first, check and see what that weather's going to be. Check and see what that wind report's going to be. Look for the direction. Look for how that current is going to be set up on your fishery, and use that to plan your day accordingly. And again, I'm fishing more finesse on less windy days. Now, I could fish a wacky rig when it's windy, but it would probably be a chaotic mess as that wind blows my line all over the place and I'm not able to fish it in the manner that I need to fish it. So that's why I'm using the things the way that I'm doing. On a windier day, well, that wind is breaking up the sunlight and it's making flashes of light underwater. And we're using something like a lipless crank or a spinnerbait. Well, that sunlight on a sunny day, that sunlight will be glinting off of that bait, and it could be an extra attractant to those fish. On a cloudy day, well, you've got the extra thump and the extra noise that goes with the noise of the surface, because when that water's windy, when those waves are crashing over and moving, well, the bass can hear that. It's not still quiet. So that's why I fish some things that are a little bit more, I guess you'd call them loud. And those are the process that works for me, and they've worked year in and year out. So try those out, and I'm sure you'll be able to get a lot more bites during the month of February. So there you have it. My very best tips, tricks, and lures for bass fishing in the month of February. As we move closer into the pre-spawn and into the spawn, it's important to use certain techniques to help unravel the puzzle and put ourselves on fish. Give these a try. I'm sure you'll like the results. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.